Here is a center change gearbox that already has been partly dismantled. The bell housing and the overdrive has been removed. Now the lid has been lifted and we are removing the selector rods and the selector forks. We are removing the screws that lock the forks to the selector rods. Now we can remove the selector rods. There are two balls located between the selector rods. They act as locks for the rods. The visible ball has fallen down and is not in its correct position. We'll remove the last selector rod. First we pick out the reverse fork. Then we pick out the first and second fork. Last comes the third and fourth fork. Here we can see some typical wear on the reverse selector rod. Here is some typical wear on the first and second rod, whereas the third and fourth rod has less wear, which also is quite typical. The third and fourth fork has a lot of wear to it. The first and second fork is also very worn. Next it's time to remove the lay shaft on which the lay gear is rolling. And the lay shaft is in a very good condition. Next we remove the reverse gear shaft and we'll pick out the reverse gear itself. Then it's time to remove the main shaft. And next it's the input shaft. Now we can lift up the lay gear from the casing. Then we pick out the thrust washer and thrust plate. Here we can see the needle rollers in the lay gear. Here is a side change box that has been built with a Sebring ratio straight cut gear set. We're gonna take the gear set out of this box and put it in the center change box that has already been dismantled. I have sped up the speed of the dismantling process of the side shift gearbox, as it's much the same as the center change. Badly worn reverse gear. The same type of wear on selector rods, removing the reverse gear, the forks and the lay shaft. It's important to roll over the casing so the lay gear doesn't get in the way of the main shaft and the input shaft. We have tapped gently on the bearing of the main shaft so that it can be removed from the casing. Then comes the input shaft, the lay gear and the thrust washers. This is an early center change casing and we have bored out the holes for the lay shaft so that it can take a thicker BJ8 lay shaft. Here we are making a bronze bush for the lay gear as the BJ8 gears were shorter. Now it's easier to check the end float of the lay gear before you do anything else with the box. It's also a good idea to check out our new selector rods, which are vital for a good gear change. There is one ball located here and one here between the selector rods. These balls make sure that two gears cannot be selected simultaneously, which would leave the car stationary. The reverse rod moves freely. First and second is locked and the third and fourth is locked. If I put the reverse in neutral, I can move the first and second rod. Put that one in neutral and then the third and fourth rod can be moved. The first is locked and the reverse. This is the main shaft and here comes the second gear synchro ring. And here comes the first gear assembly. Here comes the space ring, which is very important but can easily be forgotten. And now it's time for the main shaft bearing to be mounted. These split washers keep the bearing in place. Over them comes a collar and a circlip. Now we put the main shaft into the casing. There is a peg located in a bearing carrier on the main shaft. This peg fits into a hole in the overdrive adapter plate. Therefore I always use the adapter plate to push in the main shaft assembly. Here it fits snugly and that will facilitate the fitting of the overdrive later on. Next it's time to put the input shaft in place. After that it's time to lift up the lay gear and insert the lay shaft. Next it's time for the reverse gear and its shaft. It's a good idea to put some Loctite on the threads of the lock screw for the shaft. Reverse gear selected and neutral. Now we will position the forks. Here is the third and fourth fork, which is brand new. Next is the first and second fork, which also is brand new. And the reverse fork, which is second hand because no new ones are available on the market. Now the time has come for the final fitment of all of the select rods. We start out with the third and fourth rod, which has been modified in this groove and in this one, and that is to make the gear go longer in, so to speak. We slide it in through the casing and the fork and put the lock stud on. Then we won't forget to put the ball in the hole for the first and second rod, which acts as a lock for the rods. On the first and second rod, only the groove for the second gear has been modified. We push it through and lock with a screw, and we must not forget this last locking ball. The reverse gear rod is in place, and we put in the locking screw and select reverse and try it. On the bell housing there is a rubber padding that is frequently missing. Don't forget to glue a new one in place. The spring washer is very important because it keeps the input shaft in its place. Without the washer, the box can accidentally jump out of gear. I always temporarily install the bell housing and an adapter plate. This way all the gears can be tested without running the risk of the selector hubs falling apart. Here the reverse gear works fine. I also like to try it with a lid temporarily fitted so I can test that the gear lever works alright. Reverse gear. First gear. Second gear. Works fine. Third gear. And fourth gear. The lock screws have all been secured with lock wire. The front gasket is installed. It's important to put some compound on these screws because the holes goes right through the casing into the oil. This is what a straight cut gear set looks like when it has been assembled. The overdrive has been completely rebuilt at an earlier stage and uprated to works race specification. Before mounting the overdrive to the gearbox, it's good if you have a spare main shaft to align the two splines in the back of the overdrive. This will facilitate the fitting to the box. There are a couple of different methods to mount the overdrive to the gearbox. I will show you the method that I found to be easiest. It's very important always to fit the new return spring set to the overdrive. There are two long pin bolts on each side of the adapter plate, designed to take the length of the return springs. When you use a new spring set, the bolts in reality are too short. You have to push down on the overdrive and put the nuts on one at a time. You put a piece of string around the oil pump plunger while pressing it all the way down. You route the piece of string through the adapter plate like this and tie it down real tightly. You install the cam for the overdrive oil pump onto the main shaft of the gearbox, with a thick part facing up and a thin part facing down. Here the overdrive has been installed on the gearbox. Don't forget to cut and withdraw the piece of string before tightening the nuts. Here is the finished product. One center change gearbox with a Sebring close ratio straight cut gear set and a race specification overdrive. Ready for racing.